In February of 2011, a woman gave birth to a baby boy in a Palestinian hospital. Not an unusual occurrence at all, except that this woman was not a Palestinian. She was an Israeli. Israelis are forbidden by their own government to go into Palestinian territory. But the woman was out shopping when she suddenly went into labor, and so her husband pushed her into the nearest hospital, which just happened to be a Palestinian one. At first, she was terrified to be there among the people she had been told so many bad things about. But then she opened her eyes and saw that the other women there were giving birth just the same way she was. The other women loved their children in the same way she did. The other women were in pain, just as she was in pain. Suddenly, she no longer saw Palestinians or Israelis. She saw mothers giving birth, loving, hurting. And she felt quite at ease. She was treated as one of the family, even though the Israeli insurance was not good in those hospitals and she had no money of her own. The nurses and doctors bent over backwards to make her feel at home. They looked for a doctor who understood Hebrew and could interpret for her. The Palestinian mayor of the town came to visit her, and the Palestinian president even sent her flowers in a handwritten card and directed the hospital not to take any money from this poor woman. The woman understood that in moments like that, there are no Palestinians, no Israelis. There are only people in need. Today's gospel presents us with a similar story. We see 10 people in great need, 10 people afflicted with a terrible disease of leprosy, a disease so dreaded that the laws forbade these unclean people to come anywhere near the clean people. It is a disease that destroys and eats the flesh away, and bits of the body fall off until there is little flesh left to resemble the figure of a human. We can imagine how terrified people were of such a horrible, disfiguring disease. The lepers approached Jesus and from a distance cried out for help. After they were made clean, one of them came to give thanks. Often we see this story as a story about gratitude, and indeed it is. But much more than just another story about thanksgiving, much more than just another story of healing. This is principally another story about Samaritans, people who were other. For one of those lepers belonged to that group of people despised by the others. Samaritans were regarded as racially and religiously impure, outcasts, untouchables. Jesus' own people were forbidden by their law to associate with them. So this man, one of the 10, was doubly outcast. Not only was he a leper by disease, he was a leper by birth into this despised group. But Jesus knew no such boundaries. The story of the Good Samaritan, the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, and now the story of the Samaritan leper show us very clearly that Jesus was not only willing to cross the line. For Jesus, there was no line. The amazing thing about this group of lepers is that among those Jewish lepers, there was a Samaritan. Healthy Jews and Samaritans would never have been together, associating with one another. But this terrible plight of theirs made them forget their differences and made them see only that they were all in the same boat. They were all human beings in pain. The disease that disfigured them also configured them, made them realize that they were one. No longer could they see each other as Samaritans or Jews. No, their faces were too disfigured to even notice that. They only saw each other as fellow human beings in need. "Go show yourselves to the priests," said Jesus. Now that too was part of the Jewish law. In order to be readmitted into society, in order to be able to participate in the religious rituals, in order to be able to associate with clean people, a healed leper had to go to the priests and be proclaimed clean. But there was a big problem here. What about the Samaritan? No priest would even speak to him, much less declare him clean. So he went to the one person for whom there were no such boundaries, the one person who saw him not as a leper, not as a Samaritan, but as a fellow human being in need. He went to Jesus. His love knows no bounds. His care does not recognize those boundaries of race and religion and nationality. For him, all of us are one. I often wonder what happened afterwards to this group of cleansed lepers. Did they go back to seeing one another as Samaritans and Jews? Or did they perhaps choose to remember the pain that had once made all those differences irrelevant and had united them? The leprosy had taken away their features, destroyed their flesh, and in so doing also destroyed the barrier between them. For those differences were only skin deep, and once the skin was no longer there, the differences were no longer visible. They were no longer Jews and Samaritans. They were suffering human beings. As the American poet Abejani has so aptly put it, beneath the armor of skin and bone and mind, most of our colors are amazingly the same. It is our shared pain that unites us. It is our suffering as human beings that allows us to see the other as a brother, a sister, a fellow outcast. We see that she bleeds just the same as I do. He cries just the same as I do. So often we hear about who belongs and who does not belong, who is acceptable and who is not acceptable, who is clean and who is unclean. The Christ leads us into the midst of the Samaritans and the lepers, into the midst of the prostitutes and tax collectors, into the midst of the outcasts and the sinners. And that Christ calls out, God's love is big enough for all of us. As usual, our Pope Francis eloquently echoes the unmistakable message of the Christ, whose love embraces all. Jesus sees not the Samaritan, not the Jew, but the sufferer. Our differences are to be revered, not reviled. We are meant to learn from one another, not to destroy each other. Or as the great Sufi poet Rumi has so beautifully said, Christian, Jew, Muslim, shaman, Zoroastrian, rock, ground, mountain, river, each shares in a secret way in the mystery, unique and not to be judged. When you look at another, look with the eyes of Christ. See not the Samaritan or the Jew. See not the black or the white. not the young or the old, the pretty or the plain. See not the Catholic, the Buddhist, the Muslim, the Quaker. Before you look at the other, glance first at yourself and open your eyes to the naked truth. I am a leper just like you, outcast, hurting, fearful, just like you. It is then that we can take each other by the hand, the leprous hand, stripped and liberated of skin color and all else that divides. Then we can weep together, and so come to laugh together, bleed together, in order to heal together, die together, and maybe, just maybe, learn to live together.